My name's Doug Gowan, and I'm currently the Vice Chair of ALT, which is a position which has got a far better sounding name than its reality, in fact. Earlier this year, ALT did a big consultation of members, so because we did formulate a new 3-year strategy. So members told us what was important about ALT and what was not so important and what they wanted to see. And some things that kept on coming up was, number one, leadership. Leadership is flabby, it's too short-term, it's not visionary. We need more of it, better leadership, and that's something that ALT should give some priority to. And a second area was international work. ALT itself has got an international membership. It gets involved with a number of international bodies, and it has international partners. And that's one of the issues perhaps we can discuss in this session, which is maybe how ALT could strengthen that approach. So basically, that's what I've just said, so I don't think I can skip that slide. On the panel then, we have Larry. Larry will, in fact, explain his position in the Centre for Online Innovation at Penn State, and in fact, in the Emerging Leadership in Online Learning Institute. So thanks, Larry. We'll follow that with Paul Gentle, from Leadership Foundation. And then we will follow with Eva. Eva is now in Australia, previously in London, and previously in Finland. So, welcome, Eva. We have our fourth member, who's been press-ganged to fill the fourth seat. And many of you will have seen the presentation earlier on. So, from Jeff. So, thanks for filling in at the last minute. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to call on Larry to kick this off with a short presentation. There, Larry.
Thank you, Doug.
There's only 4 seats, so I will sit on the edge somehow.
So thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm going to walk through this relatively quickly, and I'm also representing a colleague of mine, Kathleen Ives, who's the CEO of the Sloan C organization that recently changed its name to the Online Learning Consortium, and Kathleen regrets she's not able to be with us today, but I'll try to fill in a little bit of that space as well. So we've been also looking at, through a relationship with the Online Learning Consortium, Penn State has been looking at the issue of leadership development for a number of reasons in our organization and in our states. This is Kathleen, and I'll skip over that. So my slides didn't come up perfectly, but this is a bit of the motto is to contemplate personally, act locally, and think globally. So it goes to this issue about internationalization and how we keep a very broad perspective on what's happening in the online learning space. I'll talk through that a bit. So just as a context, the Institute, and we joke that you have to be able to say the letters rapidly in order to graduate from the Institute. It is IELOL. The way I remember it is Internet Explorer, laugh out loud. And the Institute now is in its 6th year. We've had over 220, as of this year we'll have 220 alums. The idea came about 10 years ago around the preparation of the next generation of leadership. As the existing group looked around, they noticed the multiple gray beards and balding heads and gray-haired leaders in the organization, and the question came out, who will be next? Who will step into this role to help online learning, virtual learning, continue on an aggressive path? And is it different? Are the leadership skill sets differently than those required to direct a higher education initiative in a residential setting? So we put together a program that would basically look at 3 things. Framing the challenges of online learning. These are new not only to us who have been in online learning for a while, but can you imagine stepping into a role outside of an online learning initiative, as we've just recently had a senior administrator at Penn State is now stepped into a director of academic affairs. She's been with the university for 20 years. This is the first time she's really being brought into the online learning context and how that is different for her. We're also looking to create a community of emerging leaders. That is, if you don't have a colleague within your own institution to connect to and commiserate with and to share experiences, where do you go for that extended community? That's what we're trying to create. And finally, is helping individuals shift their thinking from an operational framework to a strategic framework. So very quickly, the framework we find ourselves working in is much of what I think you're experiencing here as well. That is a high cost of higher education, increasing student debt that is going through the roof now, average about $28,000 to $30,000 per student upon graduation. The college degree does not always prepare the student for an ideal job. And the changing landscape is one of higher education being held to higher accountability, needing evidence of their relevance, the fit between education and the workforce. And finally, the challenge that maybe the one model for advancement is no longer appropriate. We have to consider additional models. So IELOL is a blended program designed to address this. Blended means it has 4 types of interactions. We do a 3-week online primer. We have the immersive face-to-face experience that actually happens in our hometown called State College, Pennsylvania. University Park is where Penn State is in the center of Pennsylvania. Then we have, which we just completed, by the way, 2 weeks ago, we had 49 individuals from 8 countries join us for this year's program, including a gentleman from Imperial College who joined us this year. And then we do we do a project in which time they take the experiences from IELOL and apply it to a local context within their institution. And finally, we do a pre-conference gathering at the Online Learning Consortium program, which will be held in Orlando, generally held in Orlando, October, November. The outcome of this has been a pretty intensive community that is developed, and I heard the conversation this morning a couple times came up about how critical that is, that we build capacity by sharing and capacity by joining ranks around some very difficult issues to get things done. Our individuals participating tended to be, in the early days, online professionals in the middle or upper middle management. We've found in the last 2 years an increase in what I'll refer to as senior management. The Director of Academic Affairs person at Penn State, who I mentioned has over 20 years of administrative leadership, took the program this summer because she needed the online learning context. I haven't talked to her about whether she felt it was worth it, but I'm hoping that would be the outcome. This is a cartoon that Kathleen inserted. It's not that I've changed and I've grown, but you're still stuck in the past, which is the way I think a lot of us feel about higher education. So these are the type of topics that we might deal with. All of these are forces that we're facing in the States around higher education, let alone online learning. And increasingly, online learning has become a part of that landscape. Where does online learning fit into the ecosystem of your institution? How is it embraced? How are you preparing leadership for it? How is it different than what we've done previously? And the program, in its intensity, helps to examine that. It does also some professional development along the way as well, which is about your role as a leader, your perspectives, and so forth. So I'll end there, and I know we'll have some opportunity to engage in a bit. And I think I'm the last one using a slide, correct? So I'll take it back to the start.
Yeah, we're just going straight on to Paul.
Thanks very much, Larry. Well, I'd like to share with you some perspectives around the key word in this title of leadership in TEL across the globe, and that's the leadership word. I'd like to look at, first of all, leadership for what, and just explore that a little bit. What would be the purpose of leadership of TEL across the globe if it's to be effective? Secondly, I'd like to have a look at the question of who are the leaders that we're talking about to exercise this kind of leadership. And then thirdly, I'd like to just open up what I think are some of the possibilities for the kind of international collaboration which Doug referred to earlier, and which I know is part of ALT's aspirations. So the leadership for what? What are some of the challenges that leadership faces in universities around TEL? I can speak from personal experience, having spent a good proportion of the last 2 years working on a program called Changing the Learning Landscape. I've had a leadership role in that, working with the 5 different agencies that have tried to make that happen, supporting about 140 something universities across England in addressing some fundamental challenges that they have around strategic leadership of TEL. And I think that I tried to encapsulate what the real challenge is behind what institutions that we've been supporting over this last 2 years have been trying to do. And broadly speaking, one way or another, they've all been involved with, they've all been concerned about redesigning the university so as to create the conditions for collaborative, co-produced learning which students shape and take responsibility for. Now, not all that many of the institutions have phrased it in quite such grandiose terms, but fundamentally that's been the educational vision behind what a lot of them have been aiming at. Now, there have, of course, been all sorts of other drivers for why people might have wanted to engage with our programme, with Changing the Learning Landscape. All sorts of factors such as the National Student Survey, awareness of positions in league tables, all kinds of reasons why ambitious senior managers might have wanted to see institutions engaging with learning technologies more comprehensively. So, of course, underlying this fundamental challenges that institutions may voice, there's a whole gamut of political, social, cultural, financial challenges and whatever else. But what I'd like to do is just think about what this actually has meant for those people that we've been working with. Because we've been engaging with leaders at a whole set of different levels in institutions. In fact, it's been a precondition of being able to take part in Changing the Learning Landscape that an institution has been able to come up with student leaders who are prepared to work in an engaged way with institutions on helping to drive change forward and make it happen. It's also been key that institutions have provided for the project, as it were, a senior champion, a senior management team member who will support the project and make it happen. And then in between there are a whole lot of operational leaders who've had a key role to play in bringing teams together, in putting across key messages to the academic workforce, in engaging with the professional workforce in the institution and so on. So there's been leadership at almost every conceivable level in the challenges that institutions have tried to address. And interestingly, it seems to have been equally critical to have support and active engagement from every single one of those different levels. And also interestingly, when we've brought people together in events, in development programs, in conferencing events and so on, when it really comes down to the fundamental reality of the doubts that any of these leaders in the system are facing, it all comes down, if you ask people to say, what is the real challenge that you face in your project in making it happen? If you were to express that in a how can I sort of question, fundamental behind all of that is that people say, well, my challenge is what can I do as an individual leader in my part of the system or the institution that might bring about somehow other people wanting to engage with this change that we're trying to bring about. And that role there for the leader as influencer, the leader who can make things happen, the leader who can bring people together and facilitate and negotiate around making change happen, that seems to be the real fundamental. And I'm really fascinated to see where the world seems to be going, because in an increasingly globalized environment, there seem to be all sorts of researched evidence about a whole lot of new kinds of skills that leaders at all levels are going to need to be able to manage in the world. Things like global capability in fostering cultural diversity, in leading big multicultural, multifunctional teams. I think there's a lot that perhaps we could do in the university sector to acknowledge where the sources of interest are in terms of learning globally. It's interesting that we, as a panel here, represent large parts of the English-speaking world, but let's also not forget the global importance of thinking around leadership and thinking around TEL in India, China, South America, and other places in future. Also, those aspects of leadership which are about how to harness innovation through converging technologies. It's very interesting how a lot of the the focus in TEL is still at the moment on information technologies, but what are the prospects in the future over the next 10, 20 years and so for a far greater convergence of other sorts of technologies and the life that they're likely to play in learning and in universities, nanotechnologies and biotechnologies, etc. I wonder what the future will look like in terms of leadership development when all those things really do start to converge. So finally, I think the potential for international collaboration is absolutely vast. I mean, I think there's all sorts of things that we could be doing on a more global stage to collaborate in terms of leadership development. There are clearly whole research agendas that could be identified in terms of leadership that works effectively in a global environment. And there's clearly all sorts of opportunities for inspiration and experience sharing. And I hope that this panel discussion is just a starting point to being able to explore how we might do that in future. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. We move straight on to Eva.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Eva Leinonen, Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Education, University of Wollongong. So I am a leader, but I'm not an expert in leadership. I just somehow do it. And prior to Wollongong, as you can hear from my accent, it's not a very strong Australian twang to it. I worked in United Kingdom for about 30 years, and I was here. My last position was the Vice Principal Education at King's College London. So when I think about leadership and someone like me with a very broad portfolio, my biggest challenge is always that I don't have a very deep understanding of the specifics of the areas that I need to lead. So therefore, my solution is always that I have to find people, the best people to go around me, because they are the ones who will offer the solutions for people like me, who will be the people who are in the powerful positions of making decisions about investment, strategy, talking to the Board of Governance, Council, and so on. So the best strategy that I have found as a leader, in fact, is to employ the best people around me. And I always say I'm only as good as the people around me. And it's a very, very simple strategy, but that seems to work. Having worked in the United Kingdom in two different types of universities as Deputy Vice-Chancellor, University of Hertfordshire and King's College London, and now in Australia, University of Wollongong, I can tell you that I can close my eyes in meetings and I wouldn't know always where I was. So the starting point, in fact, can be quite different. The cultures can be quite different, but the challenges and the opportunities are incredibly similar. And I think in the international context, that is something well to bear in mind. Having said that, we talk about in Australia about the Asian century. Asia is a very powerful player in the world, and increasingly so, and very close to Australia, of course. So that is where we are looking to. But I believe that the leadership styles and also leadership ethos and so on is well worth understanding in the Asian countries. And I think perhaps we may not have always paid so much attention to that. Now, I just wanted to share, as this is a learning and teaching and technology conference, just a couple of challenges that I have found as a leader in this particular sphere in all of those spaces I worked in. The biggest challenge is the strategy. How do we build a strategy and align the resources to that? And strategy that would be sustainable for at least 5 years. And you're the experts, you probably laugh at that. But when we think about investing millions of dollars or pounds on a learning platform or something, we have to think about, of course, that it benefits a very wide audience, benefits the whole university, and we can align the resources to that. And we already have mentioned that collaboration, of course, across the globe is one answer to having models that are much more sustainable for us as leaders, but also as universities. And I think we probably haven't exploited that to the degree that we surely could. I wanted to ask you a very specific question about learning platforms. I want you to advise me as a leader. Where is it going? We have invested millions and millions of dollars, and people keep asking me, what else shall we develop? What other capability? If we just use them as for information, we have definitely missed the point. It's too expensive. I always think about money, you see. One of the things for education leaders is, by the way, that they have to be very financially savvy, because that's the point where we are always having the discussions. So I just wanted to put that to you. I went to a conference in Australia recently, a blended learning conference, where University of Queensland Technology, I think it was, that were saying to us, we don't wish to invest in our learning platform anymore. Students are curators of information. The world is out there. What do we do this for? We're going to start dismantling it. I haven't been brave enough to do that, but I'd like someone to advise me whether I should. Before I finish, I just wanted to two more things. MOOCs. You know, as a leader, that's a really big question. They're expensive things to do. At Wollongong, we have done 2 MOOCs in about 6 months through the Open to Study platform, which is the Australian platform. And the deal was, which was very attractive to me as a leader, which was that they are free. All we need to do is give the staff time and they do the production. So that was good. If we now continue with it, it will cost about $90,000 per MOOC. Well, that's a big decision. So we've done it for all those reasons that everybody asked. Better to be in the tent than outside, better to have a look, learn from it and all that, which we have done. But one thing that I wanted, which is from the governance and leadership perspective, which has been very powerful, because of the hype that we have in the media, my board of governors at Wollongong read about MOOCs in the media. So they asked me the question. So it has given me a way in to talk about open learning, e-learning, MOOCs and other things, and get that on the table for investment. And I think that has been probably one of the most powerful things. The very final challenge I just wanted to talk to you about is data. Actually 2. Data, one thing. You know, data is wonderful. We talk about big data, we talk about learning analytics. But with data comes responsibility, and responsibility for action. And I have a wonderful learning analytics team at Wollongong. And we built a data warehouse, and now we are able to identify students at risk very early on through all the various touch points that they have throughout the university. The question is now, who is going to take action, and what should that action be? So there's a real leadership challenge for me, because quite innocently, I wanted to embrace the learning analytics, and it's going to be beneficial. But now a real issues around workloads, who does what, what's the best way of student support, and so on have come out of that. The hardest challenge for me as a leader, and I'm sure we'll all talk about it for years to come, how do I take all staff with me? I believe in innovation, I believe in Sandbits, I do invest in all of that. But I need to have a scalability around it, we all do. So how do we take everybody with us? And I think that throwing learning technology staff at the staff is not the answer. The answer is enabling staff to become self-sufficient. So that is where we are trying to go with that. So there's a little feel for my daily challenges, in addition to thinking about what is it that might make me the person who can lead us through that. And I think I'll just stop there, and I'm very happy to, of course, be part of the panel. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Eva. And we'll go straight on to Jeff.
I thought being last and press ganged, everybody would have said all the things, and I could be excused for being unprepared, but of course it has given me a chance to think about what to say. And actually my take is a little bit different. I'm very interested in the international aspect, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, but I was struck particularly by the greying of the leadership, and I keep my hair cut shorter and shorter as I get greyer and greyer. And what one does about that, and about the question of flabby leadership, weak and flabby leadership, and although I don't think that I don't have an instant answer to weak and flabby leadership, but one thing that has become clear to me as I spent a lot of time talking to senior management at universities all over the world, is that there is a real unease about what I think Eva's been saying of a lack of confidence with digital education in senior managers in universities that make them very hesitant to take action because they know how easily they could be wrong. And indeed, actually, you know, the leadership program that takes people formally into these sorts of training settings is one solution to that. But with respect to the University of Edinburgh, our thinking is that we need a succession plan. We need to find a mechanism to generate a rolling cadre of leaders in the area of digital education, and which in some senses actually, as I said this morning, is synonymous with education as far as we're concerned. There is no gap between these things. Saying it's a cadre of leaders who are comfortable with digital education just means a cadre of leaders who are comfortable with education in the 21st century. And the cadre of leaders, at least in universities, and I think to a significant degree in very many colleges, actually come from the academic staff. And so the question is, how do you grow your academic staff leadership skills? And how do you make sure that those leadership skills are actually in people who have also got digital education skills and understanding? And we've got two main approaches, I would say, at the University of Edinburgh, which we think will suit our setting. One of them is that we are now making a set of appointments at very senior academic level, at professorial, full professorial level, of chairs in digital education. They've all got slightly different names, but fundamentally that is what they are. They are in our academic departments, and these are people who have been appointed there into these leadership positions because of their expertise in technology-enhanced learning and digital education. And so that brings that expertise into the schools, and it helps those academic schools, I think, therefore, to grow their confidence and competencies because they've got that leadership within the school close to them. And then the trick from our university level point is that we need them to be a team across the university, because this is how you reach out to all of the academic areas and get that join-up and the synergy and get the common vision and indeed create and recreate the university's vision going forward. And from that group will come the PVCs, and in some instances, for those lucky universities or colleges that hire them, will come their VCs or their presidents or whatever, of people whose competence and comfort is in this area. And I think that without that, we will constantly struggle with this problem of having a group of people at senior level in all of our roles to whom digital education is actually a comfort area, even though the decisions are really hard, and I don't know what you do about spending millions on a VLE, although actually we don't spend millions on a VLE. But you know, how do you make those decisions? You will make them with greater confidence. The other aspect of it is that increasingly our business will be global. I mean, at this present time, 40% of the students in my university do not come from the UK. We are very international in our residential, and this international residential will grow. But of course, as we do our outreach, as we push our programs into fully online, we have learners all around the world. And the question is, how does that academic leadership in digital education, how do you make sure that they are engaged with what's going on worldwide? And to my mind, one of them is that they must be involved with the online international education, but more importantly, they must have peers and colleagues who are doing the same things at senior level in other universities around the world. And this is actually where the power of university alliances comes from, that those alliances are a place in which you, like universities and colleges that have signed up to partner with each other, can actually build in the online space, can build joint courses, can offer their students intercultural, multicultural and intercultural experiences and their teaching staff, and you will be managing projects, international projects in the education space. Something it's very, very difficult to do with residential stuff because you can only really send a handful of students. So I'll give you an example. And one of the things that we're doing, and this actually leverages off the back of running MOOCs, is to take a set of about 15 partners around the world, and we all put 500 or 1,000 students into a common online course. You can get massive. and you can get teachers who all come from those institutions and have to work and plan together, and they can support their students back home. That is a learning experience, and that is an international collaboration and leadership action for the people involved in that they could not get any other way. And I think it's looking for examples. Leadership comes out of experience and practice. It comes out of failures and successes and reflection on it. And the question is, how do you create those opportunities, and how do you create those cadres of staff and use them to build that leadership which will last you 10, 20, 30, or if you get really old like me, even longer. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Well, that's 4 fascinating and very different presentations. So it's now, let me throw it open to you. Let me remind you, you can make 3 kinds of interventions. You can make an individual query or point about one of the presentations. You can ask a question of the whole panel, or you can actually make a suggestion about something alt should be doing in this area. So who's first? Have we got over here? Sorry, have we got...
Thank you very much. Paul Baxage from Cero Consulting, and just starting a new project on European leadership development involving the French, the Catalans, and the Italians, proving that not all money goes to the Swedes, the Germans, and the British. And it was interesting what Eve, I mean, my basic point is about cultural differences and whether some of you are actually ignoring them. And one of these issues comes up in Jeff's presentation as well. To me, having worked quite closely with some nationalities not so commonly seen in Framework and Horizon and lifelong learning programs, the cultural differences that Eva talked about, she would notice them immediately. She could not fall asleep in a French university and think she was in the same place as where she's worked. It's not just to do with funding. That's the simple British, i.e. English approach. Oh, well, you see, they don't understand about funding drivers. They understand fine about money, it's just the money comes in a different way, and the PR game you play is rather different. So I think I'd be interested in people's take on whether there are still significant cultural differences between countries that are geographically close. Maybe even Australia and New Zealand, for example. The second point, coming back to Jeff, I think is, I think it's easy for the research-led universities to fall into a comforting, let's be honest and judgmental and call it a Universitas 21 or a sub-Universitas 21 kind of paradigm, that the game is the same for all of us. It's basically keep the Nobel Prize winners flowing in, keep the grants up, keep research outputs flowing, and it doesn't really matter what country you're in. Now, we had an interesting discussion earlier about universities that forgot which town they were in. On the whole, that's a catastrophic mistake. I won't name any institutions that made that mistake, but those of us who check these things do know about them. So I think there's the issue of the locality as well. Just coming back to the process, I think there's, in a sense, 2 kinds of leadership development. One is developing leaders from within the TEL community. I think history on the whole is against Jeff's strategy. If I were to, embarrass my friends from a little black book and look at the career trajectories, on the whole, success in research is not necessarily correlated with any operational competence in deploying e-learning, a point I made in several papers. Secondly, the trajectory of famous professors in e-learning doesn't always end that well. And secondly, they tend to get their kind of power kicks probably from the private sector, or from basically becoming a trusted advisor to the European Commission or a national government, rather than through the kind of classic Dean PVC VC route. So I think history is against you, Jeff, but things might be changing. I doubt they are, because in fact many of us who came up that route came up in days when basically research, teaching was all the same. A good person was a good person. And to be honest, the symbiotic and beneficial environment of the OU, which probably didn't ask these tough questions till rather later than some institutions, but sure asked them now, I think was very beneficial. You can't sneak up that middle route where you avoid answering questions about what you are really. The whole world's kind of gone against you. So I think it's a bit tougher than any of you say. But as I say, I think the cultural barriers, both within between countries and between types of institutions, need more attention. Maybe from institutions that aren't on the panel. I don't know.
Well, thanks, Paul, for that fifth presentation. This question about cultural barriers, I mean, we have several people who are more than adequately prepared for that. Can I start with Eva, perhaps?
Yes, certainly. Shall I have the microwave even? Cultural differences, at the level that I work, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education, the decisions tend to be quite high level. But in making those decisions, of course, you need to be aware of cultural variations in the types of universities, but also in terms of different types of countries. I admit I worked in Britain and Australia, very similar, but I have very good understanding of Finland, of course, my home country. I worked in the Russell Group University in post-92, and Wollongong is kind of a 94 group type university. I have to say that the starting points are different, and also the steps that one needs to take in order to get to a particular goal will be different, but also they are likely to take different time frames. But the goals, what I'm really saying, the goals from my perspective are very similar. And of course, they can be adjusted according to what are the priorities of the university. So if you're a very research-intensive university, say if you're doing MOOCs and so on, you are more than likely to really build on your research strengths, and we heard that today, and really showcase that. If you're a university with very strong teaching focus, you may not actually be getting into the MOOC world in the same way. So the decisions are very culturally determined in the finer detail, but the big decisions about whether we can afford this, is this the benefit of the university and so on, are probably more higher level in a sort of different way. I don't know whether that makes sense to you, but that's the world that I have had a very close look at.
Okay, if I could just pass to Larry to say a couple of words, because you mentioned, Larry, about some of your programs. You had people coming from 5 continents, basically.
And there are several different perspectives that we look at in the Institute on regarding culture. One is the culture of the institution, readiness for change, and things like that. That seems to be fairly steady type of situation from university to university context. How do you get up, or how do you manage up? How do you manage horizontally, and so forth? But I think the point you're raising, Paul, is a really important one, and one that we've experienced at the personal level, because as you invite and have international groups come into your program, it changes the tenor of the conversation. I'll give you an example. We run the Institute and one part of it around problem sets, and so we identify problem sets. Well, there's a project going on right now in the States called SARA, the State Authorization Regulation Act. The federal government said that one state has to be identified and approved of in another state to do online learning and such. When you have people coming in from South Africa or from Lebanon or wherever, that means nothing to them. And it might not even be of all that much interest. So we had to rethink, how do you talk about the cultural, how do you talk about issues and devoid of some context, because the contexts are going to be unique and change for each. I think we did okay for the reasons that Eva suggested, that many of the challenges we're facing have a baseline information set that we all need to understand, MOOCs and MOOCs, or MOOCs wherever they might be held. However, how they get managed and dealt with within your institution, because of who you are, your size, your Carnegie classification may vary. And we're wrestling with that, and I won't say that we got that quite right, but we're sensitive to the output.
Okay. Do we have any further questions?
Hi, I'm Alan Sito from Edgehill University. I just want to touch on about the point about culture as well as leadership. Although I came here for about 27 years, but I still got a strong Chinese kind of cultural background. In terms of the leadership skills, we tend to believe, whoever's going to lead, who should be or could be led by modeling. So if we're going to appoint someone who led on TEL, then that he or she should have a good understanding about TEL. But I think, what I came across seems to be generally in HE, we appoint, seems to be good manager, but not necessarily have the TEL understanding. So although he or she can be work with a bunch of good people, but when we put advice suggestion in to the manager, he or she still couldn't make the decision because they worry about the lack of confidence that Jeff was talking about. So my question is, shouldn't the university senior level, when they appoint manager, should assess their understanding of TEL before they appoint it, rather than they appoint someone and then start thinking about, oh, he or she need the leadership skill? Sorry.
Well, I mean, I think for success, you're going to wind up with both, aren't you? Because there's no point in having somebody who's got lots of expertise in TEL and no leadership skills. And this is really what I was addressing. The question is, how do you generate a pool of people within your own institution in the first instance, given that very many people do move up within their institutions, and okay, some people you will lose laterally to other places, but for sustainability, you need people who have got leadership skills and who have got TEL understanding and skills together. And at this point in time, I guess that we probably still have a deficit in terms of enough people who have got experience of learning and teaching online and actually understand where it's going. And although I take Eva's point about having a team of people around you and you can't be expert in everything, I think that it does make a significant difference if you have experienced and understood different ways of doing learning and teaching. And for so many of the older cadre, and I put myself in that group, our experience is a very traditional education. Our teaching experiences are very traditional education. And so the question is, how do you generate and bring a group forward? I think that, and it goes back to Paul's point, I mean, a lot of my understanding about how global education works is by working in international multicultural projects where I have worked with senior staff from a very wide range of cultures. And you can read as much as you like and you watch as many YouTube videos as you wish. It's not the same as working on concrete things. And so that's why I would want to see my emerging cadre of leaders working in those projects so they understand, but also so that they've got friends and colleagues. Their network is global of people who understand TEL and who are leaders in their peer universities, whichever their peer universities or colleges are around the world. And I accept we're tiered, and that's just life. But within, that group that your university works with, the ones they have memorandum of understanding with and all that, that's where your professional network needs to be.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Jeff, that, cultural issues aren't abstract. They are very specific and concrete, and I think we need to keep that in mind. Did you want to say anything? No. Okay, we have got time for a couple more questions. We've got one in the middle here.
I'm Paul Norman from the University of Portsmouth. You talked about collaboration, and you are all from Western universities across the globe, so that's your global dimension. But isn't one of the biggest things we're missing here in terms of leadership is actually where the biggest growth rates in education going to be? Where are the current biggest growth rates in internet access? They're not in your countries represented by your collaborations that you're talking about. They're in developing countries. And they're the ones that are going to be challenging the model of education. They're the ones that are going to need leadership or provide leadership. If you think about some of the models of delivery, they're not going to have broadband infrastructure in their own countries. They're going to be mobile and they're going to leapfrog many of the technologies we've embraced and developed over the years. So to what extent is leadership within the model you've been discussing there actually quite an old model, and it's not necessarily one that's going to change the world in the next 20, 30 years?
So at Penn State, my home institution, I like to say that we are not very international in lots of aspects. We do research internationally very well, but in terms of partnerships and reaching out to other institutions, I always say we don't play well in the sandbox. Our definition of, this isn't being recorded, right? Our definition of partnership is, yes, we'll partner with you, send us your students. That works really well from our perspective. One of the things that we're trying to do through our initiative called the World Campus, there you go again, the World Campus. It sounds like world domination. Truth of the matter is we have about 3% international students taking our programs, and most of those are military students around the world. So we're not very international. I've been encouraging our senior administration to think about an internationalization effort of some sort in order to get our staff, our faculty, thinking about how do you interact, how do you consider culture. Jeff, I think, put it brilliantly that it is, until you do it, it's just an abstract theory. But it's been really difficult in-house to get an administration who doesn't already think about internationalization and that broad global perspective. I'm sure they do at some level, but at the ground level of creating true partnership relationships, we're not getting it yet. And that worries me because I think it's going to be an impediment to us moving forward. That wasn't recorded, I'm sure.
That's a really good point about collaboration and having true collaboration with your international partners. University of Wollongong has a very big international reach. We have a campus in Dubai that has been there for 20 years, collaborations in Hong Kong, Malaysia, China, and so on. And they are all within the reach of my portfolio, so I have to, and my team have to work very closely with these other collaborations. One of the important things is in my view, is we don't have any particular skill sets. I don't know any training particularly to work in different cultural contexts, and that's something we probably want to think about. But I think it's something about instinctively being sensitive to differences and not finding differences in any way threatening, but actually a value that you can learn from as well. So it's something about a mindset that I think you need to have in order to work with different cultures successfully. Our director of Technology Enhanced Learning, who's here today, just on his way here, dropped in Dubai for the first time. And I just reflected on the fact that we didn't really have a conversation about, I'm familiar with Dubai and he's not. And maybe that is something like, as a leader, should have thought about. As it happens, he's a very good guy and very sensitive to these kinds of issues. But it's something that I think we probably don't do to the degree that we should do.
Okay, one of the aims of the session was to explore if there were any ideas about what ALT should be doing to increase its activity on leadership or international issues or both. So do we have any suggestions or contributions on that? No?
So I've got a question, really.
You've got a question?
Yes, please, if that's
Go
all
on
right.
loud, Maren.
I feel if no one else wants to take the opportunity, I want to take the opportunity. One of the things we've been thinking about, which is why we're having this panel, is to possibly set up a special interest group or some kind of, special group for individuals or organizations that are part of our community and that are part of your communities, to try and maybe take that forward, maybe try and see between now and the next conference whether we can get some momentum up in developing some international collaboration ourselves. We always say collaborating is the key stone of what we all do, and we want to do more of that. So I think maybe I'd like to pose that as an open question to participants here in the room and online, but also to the panel on whether that is something you might be interested in being involved in.
You did have further points.
Thank you, Bill Ashraf, University of Wollongong. I think one of the really good things about being back in the UK, so I'm currently based in Australia, is I get the opportunity to listen to Radio 4. All seriousness apart, I was listening to a programme the other day, bear with me on this one, it talks about the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and its sort of development today, post sort of 1945 is very sort of Eurocentric. But actually talking about how that sort of evolved in terms of the BRICS actually having more and more sort of influence, sort of a soft power. So in terms of sort of an international collaboration, I wonder whether looking at Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa as being the linchpin of widening that sort of participation and diversity. Just wondering what your thoughts are in relation to working with those types of cultures and countries.
I think it's the same point we had before about, you know, perhaps we are here from English-speaking countries, and perhaps that's something that would be something that we should be looking at as part of what Marion suggests would be some kind of an investigation over the question of what would an international perspective of alt be, what should it be, what are its deficits at the moment, and what are its opportunities. So I think that point has been made a couple of times, so thanks for that. Any further reactions to?
I mean, there are TEL communities which are focused very differently to this conference. You know, I mean, there's e-learning Africa, for instance, to which many people go, and some of my colleagues do. And there are similar kinds of events within Europe that draw very strongly on Russia and out to the east. So there is regionality, I think, in terms of the e-learning communities, and there are Southeast Asian ones. And the question is, I suppose, from an perhaps from an alt perspective, is how does one connect with those other communities? Because there's no point in trying to create them when they already exist, and they are very strong and very active. The question is, how does one collaborate and cooperate with them? Because it addresses that question of leadership in areas where education is growing very rapidly and where the internet, etc., is still relatively weak, is collaboration into those pre-existing groups, I think. And that is probably the most powerful thing one could do, which is actually analogous to the University Alliances kind of model or College Alliances model, that you work with people in strategic areas to try to get cooperative and collaborative activity.
Okay, I'll take one last contribution here, and then I do aim to meet my performance target, even if it damages my creativity. There we go.
I just was going to respond to your question about leadership, building leaders who have it's within their comfort zone to deal with learning technology. I think that was someone else's phrase. But, well, the one thing that comes to my mind, and we're trying this at my university in Leicester, is so the HEA fellowships for teaching staff encourages an understanding of and an application of learning technology. Now, I have to say I'm not familiar enough with that framework to know whether the higher level fellowship, maybe someone here would know about whether the very highest level of fellowship insists on principles of, yeah, that's right. Is there something in there that says you need to understand learning technology within education and its role? And if not, it should be. I would suggest. And if not the HEA fellowship, because I know our HEA is, most of our Quangos are undergoing issues with our with our funding. Perhaps there is the various professional bodies. Perhaps the medical education professional body would have some sort of tenet in there for that leadership must be demonstrated with an understanding of learning technology at the institutional as well as in the individual teacher roles. So that would be a beginning point to what you said.
Okay, it's just on 4:10. I would like to thank the four panel members, and I'd like you to give your appreciation in the normal manner. Thanks.